Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Because this is Hull2, and Hull2 is basically the test bed for how I got the EQs out of ConsoleLA. As you might know, I've just put out ConsoleLA, and that one's gone over pretty well. I feel like it's worked quite well, although I have been honestly too busy developing other things to even get much useful mileage out of it so far, but that will be coming. It is, after all, my favorite console of types of sound that you can get out there. Well, the way that I got the EQ out of it was developing this variation on the Hull plugin. And we can hear by jumping back into old Alien Kittens there, we've got the treble and the mid and the bass. This is assembled in such a way, similarly to how the lettered console versions are assembled. These are all designed as EQs that are sort of subtractive style crossovers. By that, what I mean is it does filtering to make the midband and then subtracts that from highs to split out the high band, and then it does more filtering to do bass and then splits that out from the highs as well, in such a way that if you add everything together at exactly 0.5, you will get essentially perfect output because nothing will have been done. Now, in ConsoleLA, this does saturation things. It does analog style modeling, but you don't have to do that, and so Hull2 is without the analog style modeling. It's without any saturation, without any anti-saturation, so it is a higher resolution, but probably less vibey sound. We can fire up Alien Kittens again, and you can hear that we can boost the highs for a very clean, crisp sound out of that behavior. Or we can cut it in a number of ways. We can cut it in this way that tends to pull 10K out of it first, or then go all the way down, which gives us a drop right at the maximum limit, because this is an unusual little algorithm, and I'm going to show you more about that in a moment. We've got our mid-range, so we can do that thing of having a little bit more in the way of sonority, that loudness quality going on. Or we can do what we can do with ConsoleLA, suck the mid-range out real aggressively and get that sort of mid-70s Bowman Sparkle sound, which is specifically a mid-70s kind of thing rather than an SSL Bowman Sparkle sound, because we've also got a slightly different bass crossover with this than on ConsoleLA, but it's a very simple one, and you're bringing up lows without focusing them or pulling them out. And what we're going to do right now is look at that on some noise. So I'm going to cut back the volume, I think. But if I go over to some noise, select a little area there, and play that, you can see on the version of Oxangos Band that I have in there that we can watch what it does. I can set it to flat, and this is white noise, but it's set so that it doesn't have the slope that would make it line up properly for musical content. But this will show us the particular quality of the treble lift on this particular algorithm. It's Hull2. That describes the treble to mid-range cutoff. The bass is just sort of added there because there was one in ConsoleLA, so I thought I should throw one in. Watch what this does. If we pull it back, Hull2 does this little notch just above 10K. This is at a 96K sampling rate. This is. It does cover multiple sampling rates, but as you can see, it's doing something a little bit different frequency-wise. Then as we go beyond that, sorry, I jumped around for a second there. We start getting the 10K back, but then it starts notching out in a different way because Hull is essentially an algorithm that works like weird variations of averaging. And these are the things averaging does. So I voiced a variation on the Hull algorithm to sound its best on musical content. I wanted it to give me that early 70s kind of tone to the boosting and cutting. And that translates to some funny, weird behavior when you're just using it directly. This is one of those ones where I could have dialed it in and it would have acted like, limiting the cut to only this much and ignoring this part of the screen, or limiting the boost likewise. But I don't like designing stuff like that, so I made it go to the crazy extremes where it starts doing weird things in combination with settings. And the same is true for the bass setting. This bass setting has a built-in upper mid dip around 7 Hertz to 1K or so. In fact, we can exaggerate that even further by pulling the mids out, or we can pull the treble out too, and then we have everything taken away quite radically. It's a weird little toolkit, this equalizer, this Hull. Like we can throw in treble and see that we have an extraordinary dip here, but if we have the mid-range sit without being radically cut, our dip is closer to 700. If I pull it back, where you find this small dip sneaks lower and lower as you go. It's still a very broad EQ curve, and by the same token, if we're cutting it, we can cut it fairly effectively. This is not going to be like a special infrasonic filter, but you'll notice that it's boosting the low mids in the same way. And then we can pull that back a little bit, or maybe boost this a little bit. And you'll notice that there is these funny interactions, these funny notches in here. I think these end up being musically useful. You'll notice that since this is not a saturating filter, if we have everything boost or everything cut, maybe that's cutting a little farther than it needs to be. Unlike ConsoleLA, if you boost or cut everything the same, it continues to add up to be the same. This one can stay flat if your settings are flat. It's just going to do that thing where you can make weird shapes out of it if you wanted to. Like this shape being all mids, or we can fool around and have the treble switch over to that the 10K notch that it produces naturally because it's an averaging style effect. We just have to go a little higher because it's relative to where your mid-range setting is. And you notice that it's still pulling the treble back a little bit, but it's throwing that notch in there And then as you return to flat, the way it's going to act is to let you throw a more significant effect on there. But if you just use tiny amounts of adjustment, just a little bit of nudge there, it'll do a really clean job of giving you just a little bit of height without necessarily throwing a lot of unreasonably high frequencies on. Or just a little dip that's kind of centered around 10K in specific. And that's because it is based on those averaging effects. That is what the Hull filter is designed to do. So Hull2 is a 3-band equalizer that extends upon the ability of the original Hull filter, which is for stock market purposes. Similarly to Holt, some of these things are designed for taking things that were used for visualizing noisy data and applying them to audio. As such, it is not set up to give you a massive averaging thing that will sweep way downwards. Hull was never really very good at that in the first place, but what it will do is give you a neat little 3-band EQ that doesn't have any saturation, so it can go cleaner than you would necessarily get out of more of an analog-y vintage vibe style plugin. But it's still using those unusual algorithms that interact in interesting ways. And as such, this is not your DAW's biquad filter. These have a additional tonal effect because the funny behaviors are not being generated by complicatedly modeling them with a bunch of biquad filters and going, okay, when I turn it down here, I throw on the biquad for the really steep notch filter. It's not doing any of that. That's coming out of very simple processing of the samples coming in. And similarly with the bass, the reason the bass does that weird thing is it's a very, very simple filter. It's just stacked up a little bit. It's got a couple of layers on it, and it's been designed to have that effect in the hopes that, say, if you're wanting to voice the frequencies of the mixer of your sound so that you're pushing a little bit more in the really deep bass, you might also want to pull a little of the lower mids out just to sort of highlight that change that you made. And it lets you do these changes while keeping things closer to flat than you would otherwise have to do. And most importantly, with way less processing than normal DAW parametric filters and things would force you to use. And that's kind of one of the secrets of ConsoleLA. I'm pleased that people are responding well to ConsoleLA. This is an interesting time because essentially I have gotten a burst of inspiration, so this is entering into one of those times where maybe the plugins that I put out aren't going to be that exciting for a while, and then it's building up to, more big surprises. Except for it's not really big surprises at the moment, because it's like, yes, I'm still doing new versions of Console. I'm thinking of ways of doing those. Yes, I'm also working on the reverbs really hard, because my purpose is to do a better job than I did with K Cathedral as far as chasing the Bricasti sound. As such, I have been doing a lot of debugging and work on the householder matrix generating software that I wrote for myself, which I think is going quite well. I will find out right at the moment. I have it running on the main computer. I've got this designed in such a way where I can run it overnight and it will generate a bunch of 1,000,000 to 1 householder matrices, as in it will go until the likelihood of being able to beat the previous best is 1,000,000 to 1, because that just might work. Terry Pratchett fans would recognize that reference. And what I've been hearing out of the initial attempts at this algorithm, they're really promising. It's really promising. I should be able to kick things up a notch, and that's pretty exciting. And yeah, if anybody's been paying attention to my live streamings on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which I do 9 to 5 Eastern Time, this is starting to look interesting. I've been doing Minecraft, but then the most recent time, I went, why don't I try to play with the Godot engine? That's what I'm doing these reverb impulse generating things in. And I had this game that I made back in the day called Cluster Fluff, which you can still actually download. And I started playing with it in the newest version of Godot. And man, it started taking off. Clearly, this is something that can happen. And with a bit of luck, it's something that people might actually enjoy. So yesterday, I was staying up far too late. I have to do the self-care thing of not get too hung up on this stuff, because I was adding sound and music to that game that I had put out without sound or music previously. And by that, I mean generative music, taking my weird little Zoxbox repeating synth noise that showed up in these plugin videos before. Well, I did a little version of that as a WAV file, threw it into the game, had it just maddeningly repeating, and then I had it changing in pitch and volume and pan placement based on a particular thing in the game, meaning that it's a generative background music on the weird acid techno size of things. Godot engine has a filter, so I was able to also throw in filtering that is 18 dB up. Here's the thing, is like, Godot engine has a filter. It's not particularly special by my standards, but it is a filter, and they let you do 6 dB, 18 dB, 24 dB, and so on per octave. And the resonance goes up to 1, but you can tell your program to make it go up way higher than that. And they have a little distortion. And basically, I was able to push the Godot sound engine without even coding on it. And it is open source, so I could theoretically get access to that. But without even coding on it, I was still able to crank up the acid techno synth jam thing that I threw in as a background noise, make the filter follow what you did with the keys, and then crank up both the resonance of the filter beyond what the Godot people thought would ever be necessary, because the control that they give you goes from like 0 to 1. We're talking like a Q of something like 8 or 12 or more resonant filter. And because I have the audio and music experience, I know that the Zoxbox and the 303 are transistor-based 18 dB per octave filters. So I could choose 18 dB and get in the zone for that kind of thing, and then choose the tan style saturation, because that's a popular type of saturation that you can use to put after it. And well, maybe you can check that out the next time I do a live stream, and I'll get in there and start working on it some more. But for now, I'll talk to you later. I got to make this video and then go get some dinner and then get some sleep. Bye-bye.